So this is my life story video. It's basically just going to be me reading like 5 pages of something. So if that's not your thing, you don't have to watch this. But this is just a brief life story to kind of give you a glimpse into my life. I'll tell the people who already heard the first half where they can skip to time-wise in the video to get the second half. Or you can just watch the whole thing because I'm going to read the whole thing right now. So... I was born in 1987 to Barb Visbecki Pavia and Michael King. I was the third of 4 children, and there was another woman living with my mom and siblings named Sue Kreitzer, who also had the oldest child in the home, a son named Jonathan. She worked, provided for the family, and my mom stayed home with the children. My childhood was a mixture of normal and hell. My father, Michael King, who, if I had to liken him to someone in popular culture, I'd liken him to Charles Manson. He was a cult leader with only a small following that I'm aware of, and had women do his dirty work or really whatever he wanted, whenever he wanted them to. My mother and Sue were completely under his spell, completely brainwashed by his false doctrine. They fully believed that God had made him a prophet over our family and given him dominion over our family as well. He also told us that he was a missionary in Montana, preaching the gospel to the Native Americans, and that's why he was away so much. He visited us in Colorado twice, sometimes 3 times a year, and stayed for 1 to 2 weeks at a time. My earliest memories of abuse are around 4 to 5 years old, and they'd occur all 12 days for both or all 3 visits. So I was getting molested and raped 24 to 36 times a year growing up. The popular months were April and October, and those are still hard months. I think a good way to get a glimpse into my childhood is for me to read a segment of something I wrote in 2016 in response to Donald Trump's pussy-grabbing comments. Warning: graphic, triggering content. This past week has left me feeling suffocated, small, meaningless, voiceless, invisible, afraid, and angry. The last time I felt this amount of panicked confusion, I was 14 years old and being assaulted by my father. You see, this morning I woke up from yet another nightmare where my father, Michael King, was hurting me. This time he was fondling my 5-year-old Labia while I was on his lap watching the nightly news. 3 nights ago, I had another dream where he had taken me out of the shower to see how my body was developing, and determining I was a woman, laid me still soapy from the shower on the hard, cold, slippery bathroom counter and proceeded to break my hymen with his finger. After succeeding, he left me bleeding, crying, and broken on the counter. I was 8. That night before that, it was the time my mother allowed him to rape me in our home sunroom during broad daylight, accepting the excuse that he had to teach me about boys. I can still remember focusing all of my attention on the Rocky Mountains, standing majestically, protectively in the horizon, but just out of reach. And only 2 nights before that, I dreamt of the time he took me to a hotel room just over the Montana state line and sprayed Lysol into my 13-year-old vagina after raping me, while a woman named Sue, my designated handler, watched silently from the corner. I woke up crying in pain and panic, initially rejecting my husband's attempts to comfort me, as the last thing I wanted in that moment was to feel someone else's hands on my body. I get to relive these experiences, often in my dreams, continually, consistently, and unrelentlessly haunted by the ghost of my father, who killed himself in 2002 while out on bail. Excuse me. He overdosed on his heart medicine in a King Soopers parking lot, inside of my brother's red Neon. Right before he killed himself, he tried to kill me, and we learned of his real family that lived in Montana. He was married to a woman named Phyllis and had 3 children, Rebecca, John, and Don. I remember as a child Sue refinancing our home so he could help the Indians, but it was really to pay for Rebecca's wedding. Like I said, leading up to his death were years of abuse. I was the favorite, pedestal perfect child, and up until the day my little sister killed herself, it caused pain and jealousy between us. She was never enough for him, and he made sure she knew it. That wound would never be healed between us, and the abuse continued 24 to 36 times a year until I was 13, when things really started to ramp up. I liken him at this point in time to the protagonist in Vladimir Nabokov's Lolita. Humbert became obsessed with Lolita, and just like him, my father became obsessed with me. He took me as his child bride when I was 10 years old, even bought me a $2,000 diamond wedding ring, and was trying to impregnate me with the next Jesus Christ. Sue and Michael also removed me from school and tried to buy me a house in Montana to raise this hypothetical deity child. But before the down payment could be made, my little sister, the bravest of us, told my Aunt Terry and Mom that she was being abused, and swift action was taken in 2002. He was arrested in Montana and booked into the Gallatin County Detention Center on charges of sexual abuse of a minor, and I was given the choice to go with my mother and sister or go to foster care since Sue was not my legal guardian. I was still so terrified of Michael at this point and completely obedient that I obeyed him and went to foster care, after he called my mother the devil and a woman of the world. I remember crying so hard the first couple of days in the new home that the memory still feels like yesterday. I was 15. At one point in my very first home, I kept cycling between reading The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe by C.S. Lewis and sobbing uncontrollably in my bed. My foster mother told me at this point that if I didn't stop crying soon, she was going to send me to a juvenile detention center for girls. So from that point on, I took my crying outside. She lived on a farm and hung out with the much more understanding animals. There was a litter of Great Pyrenees puppies that were just born, and I remember them providing me a lot of comfort. Unfortunately, my dad gave me a cell phone that I hid in the groin of my pants so my foster parents wouldn't find it. He asked where I was, I would tell him, and Sue and Michael would be waiting for me on my way to school. They'd swift me away to a parking garage where he'd rate me in the back of her maroon Trailblazer, and then they'd send me on my way to school, semen still dripping down my leg. This continued from February to June 2002, and I was transferred between 5 homes during that time. Eventually coming to a breaking point, I told Sue and Michael that I can't take any more, and they told me that it was okay that I went home. They didn't want Sarah, the hypothetical deity child, to be born in foster care anyway. It was when I finally went home that I realized Michael had been abusing Mary the entire time too. I took my cell phone into the street and smashed it with the hammer. According to eyewitnesses, this was the beginning of his demise, as he begged Sue to buy him a gun so he could kill me and himself. Sue said no, and so he took my brother's car and OD'd on his heart medicine. I remember getting the news from Jonathan, Sue's son, and I ran into the street so freaking happy. I had never felt freedom like that before in my life. There will always be a life before and after Michael killed himself. It didn't take long for my mom to get back into the dating world. She'd leave often to go speed dating, where she quickly found dates. I remember being picked up from swimming practice in one of her boyfriend's cars. The sickening way he was being so nice to me didn't fool me in the least. He was trying to impress, and I'd seen it 1,000 times before from my dad. The guy didn't last, but it didn't take long for my mom to find a man named Tony that, for the most part, I don't have much to say about. The only interesting thing of note regarding Tony, who turned into my stepdad, is that he came into the family very controlling. I was a good kid, but he made rules and demanded I followed them. My mom always backed him up, which is still kind of triggering. As soon as I got back from foster care, my sister went into rehab. She initially, when we first found out about the abuse, went to live with my aunt and uncle until my mom got back on her feet, but they found her too wild to handle when she wouldn't stop sneaking out. It cut off. I never told my friends about my past. I transferred high schools and, for all intents and purposes, had a very welcomed fresh start. High school was kind to me, and I still have several lasting friendships from that time. But it didn't take long for trauma to start popping up. I joined the Mormon Church soon after the missionaries baptized my sister. They would relentlessly be very persistent in their quest for me to become a member, often visiting daily to talk about the gospel of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. A year later, I was baptized. Following a missionary from my area to Texas, I enrolled in school and started getting serious with my boyfriend. Things unraveled with him around Christmas of 2005. I remember asking my friend if she thought any of the other guys in the ward would want to date me, and I'll never forget her "I don't know" reply. Thanks for the confidence boost, there, Leanne. Luckily, there were ones that gave me a chance, and I met my husband and married him in 2007 inside of the Dallas, Texas temple. We've had a lot of ups and downs, but he's my rock, and we just celebrated 10 years of marriage. I was 20. Mormons tend to marry young. Things went well for a couple years. We did the Mormon thing really well, upholding our callings, going to church, going to the temple. We were very involved. It wasn't until my son was born in 2010 that things started to really shift for me. And it was on Christmas Eve of 2010 that Mark's grandmother told me that because I believed in gay marriage, I would be weeded out at the last day. It wasn't a good night. Following the Christmas Eve from hell, I went home to research the church more and found out enough to make us want to leave, most from church-approved sources. I didn't want to fill my son's head with what I felt was false doctrine, the same way my head was filled with false doctrine as a child. In 2011, we left the church. After leaving the church, things were calm for a couple of years, and then my mom asked to come live with us in 2013. Her business that she created with my little sister had failed due to Mary's drug addiction and poor planning, and so I agreed. She slept on our couch, couldn't keep alcohol out of the house, and stayed on the couch until we could move into an apartment with 3 bedrooms. We moved the weekend I was having a C-section with my second born. She lived with us, and this is when drinking started to become a problem. We eventually found her a job and a home of her own, and are currently still working on forgiveness and our relationship, but things are getting better. Following the mom on the couch phase, we bought a house, got our kids, the one old enough, into school, and life has been pretty quiet. In 2016, for 6 months, I felt that too many boundaries had been crossed by my mother, so that I essentially cut her out. And it was on Halloween of 2016 that she came back into my life. My drug-addicted sister had posted on Facebook that she had died, and because I wasn't speaking to her, I bought it hook, line, and sinker. I was up all night with worry until we connected the next day, and I realized she was alive. I invited her back into my life at this point, and things have been okay. Things have been as okay as they can be in such a dysfunctional family. Then things went back to quiet. In 2017, my little sister went into a complete mental breakdown on Facebook Live in Bangkok, Thailand, and this is the beginning of the end for her. My brothers and mother refused to help. They were already tired of all her bullshit. So it was just me and her friends trying to calm her down and convince her that people were not chasing her. At one point, she ripped off a woman's hijab, thinking it was a spy. And at another point, she tried to climb out her 10-story window. And at another point, she threatened the police to arrest her. But they didn't, but eventually, with help from the embassy, got her into a mental hospital. She also dropped down to her knees during that time and screamed for my mom. And it's still one of the saddest things that I'm never going to forget. She hated me ever since that, and her last words to me were, "I thought I blocked you, you stupid, stupid woman." After this, while I was still wrestling with all my PTSD, I heard she made it back to the States and tried to hold down some jobs. In 2018, she enrolled in college to finish her degree, but only made it a month before She enrolled in college to finish her degree, but only made it a month before some little 21-year-old RAs found her hanging from her bedsheet from the top bunk of her dorm bunk bed. I will never forget the call I got on the 4th of October, 2018, telling me that my little sister was gone forever. What sucks even more is she listed Sue Kreitzer, my abuser, who completely abandoned me, as her mother, so she was the first to find out with a police visit to her home. My brothers are both still in contact with Sue as well, but she abandoned me in every aspect of the word. The next year, which leads basically up to the present, is a blur. I've struggled with grief, with drinking to numb the pain of losing Mary, and I really felt lost during this past year, and it wasn't until my son started to notice that I decided to change and to join a program and to really deal with my grief, my PTSD, and my poor coping skills. And that is my life story.